Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. Several people have asked me since the assassination of Charlie Kirk last Wednesday, several people have asked me to put my 2 cents on the video and post it up. I think I'm ready to do that now. What I want to say to start out with, the violence in this country seems to be on a rapidly increasing downward spiral. Mass shootings in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Evergreen, Colorado. Young immigrant stabbed in Charlotte, South Carolina. I was switching planes in Charlotte the day that happened, flying back from an NRA Board of Directors meeting. And then September 10th, last Wednesday, the assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah. Is this the beginning of the civil war that we feared would happen last year before the election? Or is it the result of Trump being elected and those people with Trump derangement syndrome simply coming unglued? The assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah on September 10th shocked the nation. As we see in demonstrations from all over the globe, it shocked the world. The United States has a history of assassinations of leading political figures in our country. It's not unique around the world, certainly. But with shots being fired at both President Trump and Charlie Kirk in little more than a year, 2 such attempts, 1 successful, this is extremely troubling. Now, there are some unexplained questions about the Trump shooting that occurred last year in Pennsylvania. And similarly, I think there are some unexplained questions about the Kirk shooting in Utah. But I think, especially if you're looking at this as I am from a law enforcement point of view, the difference in the information we're getting between last year and this year is very dramatic. The FBI traditionally is one of the slowest investigative bodies in the world. And they are also one of the least transparent. All they will ever say is it's under investigation. They can't provide any more information. But Director Kash Patel is releasing lots of information about this, much sooner than we would normally see from the FBI. So in my opinion, compared to the old FBI, the new one is moving at practically warp speed. And they're being much more transparent. Now, the questions I have about the Charlie Kirk shooting, many of the ones I initially had have already been answered, I think. And more will be. But until we know really what happened there, I'm going to ask the questions that I have. So stick around. I want to discuss some aspects of the Charlie Kirk assassination. And I want to have a look at this rash of violence to see if we can identify some patterns, especially patterns that might allow future prevention of some of this violence. I want to announce to you that both versions of my book, Building a Better Gunfighter, are available now on Amazon.com. There's a Kindle book version of this for $9.95. There's the paperback copy for $19.95. Of course, sales tax is going to be added to both of those. Just search for Building a Better Gunfighter. Now, as I said, right after the assassination, I was very tempted to post my thoughts right away, but I decided to wait and see if some things would come to light that made sense of some of the questions that I had at the time. And that information has come forward. I think several of the questionable aspects of the shooting now make sense. Active shooter situations happen all the time, not only in the United States, but around the world. And in fact, per capita, we are not number one for active shooting events around the world. We also see random violence, like the girl stabbed in Charlotte. But Charlie Kirk's murder was a true political assassination. Now, he was not himself an elected politician, but he was a major factor in Trump's reelection. He brought in many young voters to the MAGA cause. He might have single-handedly made the difference. So that absolutely made him a prime target for the Trump haters and the woke progressive movement in general. So is this a beginning of a wider, more violent war being launched by the radical left? Or will Charlie's murder create such a shockwave around the world that the violence might die down? The virulent Trump haters in the increasingly radical Democratic Party, they're not cooling off their rhetoric yet. We've seen many haters go to TikTok and other social media and say how happy they are that this guy was killed. The assassin in Utah hunted Charlie Kirk. He felt he had every right to stop him from further spreading his ideals. All the time labeling Charlie as the hater. Now, it's very easy to see where this culture of hate comes from. You don't have to look any further than Democratic politicians in Washington, D.C. I saw one Democratic politician on an interview yesterday say that, well, over 70% of the violence in the last 20 years in the United States has come from white supremacists. And they point to January 6th as a lot of that. Now, I'm not defending what happened on January 6th. I think there's more to the story that, again, we don't know. But folks, this hate and this violence is coming from the left. For the most part, people on the right don't riot, don't murder, don't assassinate. We use peaceful means to try to get what we want changed. Now, on a positive note, many of these people who lauded Kirk's murder or tried to blame it on President Trump's supposed hate speech have been fired for spreading their very real hate speech. It's about time. Modern social media allows very small, vicious people to become a big deal and run their mouth for a few minutes. And so many other people who read their posts are egged on by that hate, that vitriol. Now, as a career firearms instructor, when I see these kind of violent events, I tend to see them from a different perspective than most folks. Immediately after the Trump assassination attempt, I pointed out how that more than 20-mile-an-hour crosswind might have saved the president's life. That shooter was facing bullet drift in the area of 3 to 4 inches, and so if he was aiming center, that was enough to move that bullet to an ear hit. There were other factors going on. Trump turned his head, a number of things. That's not the only factor, but nobody else has really looked at the wind drift problem as a factor in that save. I see a few odd things about the Charlie Kirk assassination that still leave me with questions. The angle of the bullet impact. Very quickly after it happened, I started getting text messages from friends. I saw the video of the extreme bleed out and him fall from the chair. My daughter was especially bothered. She had just gotten off of work when, looked at her phone and apparently it popped up unasked. And she saw that aftermath of that bullet impact. I've seen a lot of bullets impact a lot of things in my life, and so perhaps I wasn't as shocked as others. But what struck me to begin with is the shooter's position should have given him a straight-on shot. But that impact appeared to be off-center, almost coming in from his left, but it was difficult to tell. There was no apparent exit wound, often the sign of a small caliber bullet hit, which will go in and then fragment inside the target and not exit. And talking, on text with a friend who's very knowledgeable about such things, and he sort of agreed. He said, well, it must be a light caliber because, you know, we saw the impact, we saw the huge gush of blood coming out, but we didn't see anything to indicate an exit wound. So my first impression suggested a hit from a light caliber rifle, something in the order of a .223 or a 5.56. But that would have produced a very small entrance wound. When a bullet impacts directly onto skin of a human or an animal, a lot of times that entrance wound is considerably smaller than the actual diameter of the projectile. On game animals, a lot of times it's hard to find the impact point until you kind of probe through the hair and look. Exit wounds are just the opposite. They're generally much, much larger than an entrance wound. So when we got some stills or some slowdowns of that video and actually saw the impact point before the effects became apparent, it looked like a rather large entrance wound, and that's not typical for a high-velocity, small-caliber rifle. Right after that text, news reported that a .30-06 rifle had been recovered. So was I wrong about a small-caliber rifle hit? And for a while, I wondered if the .30-06 was actually the murder weapon. A .30 caliber bullet impact would have almost certainly resulted in a major exit wound if it had directly impacted the neck of a human being. So there should have been something evident on Charlie or on the backdrop behind him if that bullet had come out the other side along with a spray of body parts. But there did not appear to be an indication of an exit wound at all. So it did make sense. Now, the large entrance wound and the lack of an exit wound could make sense if Charlie was wearing plate body armor under his t-shirt. A .30 caliber bullet could have deflected upward from the top edge of a metal plate, probably. Thin metal plate is the kind that most high-profile people wear when they want to conceal the fact that they're wearing plate body armor. And if the bullet had deflected up into this neck wound from a plate, it would the bullet would have been damaged, and it would have caused a larger than normal entrance wound. So that could make sense. This is a series of video frames, and they suggest a very thin, probably a metal plate, was under his t-shirt. And you can see it kind of move up and down, the bottom edge especially, move up and down like it had been impact driven upward somewhat, and then the last one, you're going to see that impact point. Now, I've seen other video images, and other people have commented, well, gee, you can see his nipples showing through the t-shirt. That's true. That would preclude the wearing of soft wraparound body armor. But if he's wearing very thin, say titanium type plate armor, they are normally too narrow. They don't cover enough area to cover up a man's nipples. So that thin plate would make sense. So if there was a hit at the top edge of the plate, and you can sort of say you see that in this image, could that explain that angle of impact that I saw? That I thought, well, gee, this is not really a straight-on shot. It could. It could explain that. Now, some of these images I have borrowed from videos posted by Paramount Tactical, and I suggest you go to their site, and he shows an example of very thin, kind of executive type titanium plate armor. It is contoured very much to be comfortable, to not show through even something as light as a t-shirt. And that contour at the top would very possibly have taken a very high hit bullet from a .30 caliber rifle and done exactly what happened to Charlie. The autopsy and the forensics will tell us if this theory is correct, but I think it makes sense. Now, in this video clip, the suspect is seen limping in his approach to the killing venue. And the theory is that he has the rifle concealed in his pants legs. Now, a full-size hunting rifle with a scope sight down the pant leg of a skinny dude, it's a little, I don't know if I buy that or not. But I'm going to talk about something in a minute that might explain it. Then we see video of him leaving the scene of the murder, dropping off the edge of this building. There are different levels of resolution of this video and different zoom ins, but it does look as though he has something with a towel wrapped around it, that he kind of dropped to the ground before he fell off the edge of the building, picked up, took with him. You can kind of see a towel flapping around a little bit. And we were told the rifle was found with a towel wrapped around it. So it's possible that he had that rifle intact and simply carried it away wrapped up in a towel. It's tough to tell from the video. It does kind of fit with the narrative that we've been given by both Utah authorities and the FBI. Now, I will tell you, the image that I used on the thumbnail of the what looks to be a Mauser rifle with a scope in a cardboard box, it's my understanding that is absolutely not the rifle that they found. That's just an illustrative example someone came up with. I'm not aware that any photos of the actual evidence rifle have been released. However, and Kash Patel said this morning on Fox News, a screwdriver was found on the roof near the firing point. DNA on the screwdriver has been matched to the suspect who's under arrest. So I got to ask, did he remove the stock and or the scope from that rifle to better conceal it on the way in? Was it just a barreled action down the pants leg with maybe the scope and the stock and the backpack? Lots of questions, of course. If he did that, if he disassembled that rifle to better get it into the point where he fired from, and then put it back together with a screwdriver up on the roof, it's very unlikely that that rifle is going to go perfectly back into zero. Now, there are modern rifles that go in chassis stocks or laid up stocks that have aluminum bedding blocks. I have owned a couple of rifles over there, still own a couple of rifles that I can remove from the stock, put in, re-torque back with 65 inch-pound, a click-over torque wrench, and they will go right back to zero. If he's got an older Mauser, possibly a converted K98 Mauser with a 30-06 barrel, more than likely a wood stock, probably not high-tech scope mounts. If he disassembled this thing to any significant degree and then screwed it all back together before the shot, I'd say it's unlikely that that rifle went back into zero. So we don't know, and he probably will never tell anybody. Was he aiming for the head? Was he aiming for center mass? I assume he's hunted. I assume he knows a little bit about rifles. Even at 200 yards, if this thing is zeroed, a headshot's not out of the question at all. But my point is, even if he fired center mass here, if he hit that plate there, that's several inches of error. He was excited, no doubt. He might have been not the best shot. But it also could be that he made a good shot in terms of aiming and trigger control, but the bullet was several inches off because it had been disassembled and reassembled. I think that's a theory that we have to throw into this mix. Was that hit a lucky miss? Because if he would have put a 30-06 round, unless it was a military armor-piercing round, and possibly even that would have been stopped by a titanium plate, if he had put that top dead center on that plate, Charlie would be alive today. But because it very possibly hit the edge of a plate, it took his life. A question I'd love to hear the answer to. Now, the only good thing that I can say about this assassination is that Charlie most likely did not suffer. The impact area of his neck and the fact that that bullet probably went up, it was very close to the central nervous system, the brainstem. It very possibly could have impacted the brainstem. That is the ideal sniper shot. If you can hit that area of the lower brain, someone dies instantly with no reflex movement. And if you've ever seen animals killed in that way, or humans killed with such a headshot, you will see them just kind of stiffen and tip over like a tin soldier. I've seen that, and that's, if you watch that whole video of Charlie coming out of that chair, that's really what it looked like. If that's the case, if that's the kind of hit he took, his heart might have still been beating, but he was essentially dead when he hit the ground, and I don't think he felt any pain. I hope the young man that killed him feels his future execution in an extremely excruciating way. When I was still working as a police officer in Wyoming, they had an execution in Utah. I believe the guy's name was Gary Gilmore, and I don't remember what kind of murder he did to justify the death penalty. There was a Utah officer at a conference one time, and that individual had chosen his form of execution, and he chose firing squad, which to my understanding, they still do in Utah. So they did a kind of a lottery. Any police officer in the state who was willing to take part in the firing squad could send their name in, and I understand many of them did. And they did a lottery, and they picked, I believe he told me 5 people. And when they got there, he was selected. When he got there, he said there were 5 Winchester Model 94 30-30s laying on the bench at this shooting range. And they explained to the officers that they said they're already loaded. You just pick up a rifle. 3 of them have live rounds. 2 of them have blanks. So you will never know for certain whether you fired a killing shot. So that way you can have the doubt. You can say, well, maybe I'm not the guy who took another human life. And this officer said he and a couple of the others reached in their pockets because they knew the details of what was going to happen there, and they pulled out a 30-30 round that said, that's okay, we brought our own. We want to make sure we put a bullet in this guy. That's Utah. Okay? This guy gets convicted, he's going to get the death penalty. And I hope it hurts. Now, those of us who cherish the traditional values of our country are sickened by the violence we've seen since 2020 when they tried to burn the country down. That violence is fueled by the extreme hatred of those that want to destroy our country. And something that I've learned over the years, of course, is they tend to accuse us of what they're doing. They turn around the truth in their lies to try to win. And I've kind of come up with a phrase on it that I use when I see it, and I see Democratic politicians all the time. I said, they accuse you of what they do. So they're the ones spreading the hate and intolerance, but they accuse President Trump and Charlie Kirk and everybody else of being the ones that spread the hate and incite this violence. They accuse us of what they do, and it's so evident to hear by their words. That is how extremists have been spreading their lies for centuries. We got to ramp up prevention to every degree that we can to try to survive this violent era in our country's history. We need to encourage people to report even what seems to them to be the most insignificant threats. Then we need to investigate those threats, to take them seriously. Investigate them completely and take any action we can to interrupt an attack before it can happen. And we will not stop all the attacks. We might not even stop very many. Now, I'm going to do another video talking about this violence that we've been experiencing. And at the risk of deeply insulting some of my family and friends, it is not an exaggeration to say that a lot of this in the last few years is coming from the transgender folks in our society. The young man that killed Charlie Kirk, allegedly, had a partner, a male transitioning to become a female. So while he might not have been himself part of that trans community, he was certainly a part of that trans community. And I'll talk about that in the next video. But it's a factor that we cannot gloss over simply because it makes people uncomfortable. We should establish a nationwide network of volunteers. And what I'm going to talk about in the next video is the fact that there was no high cover at this event where Charlie Kirk was murdered. This guy got onto the roof of a building fairly high. Now some people have made a big deal of the downward angle. Even if he was 50 feet or 60 feet more above Charlie Kirk's level on a 200-yard shot, that only works out to about a 5 or 6 degree downward angle shot. That makes virtually no difference in the impact of a bullet at 200 yards. So the height and the downward angle really don't enter into that this much. But what enters into it is that someone should have seen him on that roof long before he was able to make that shot. The fact that the police agencies today do not consider high-angled threats, high-angled rifle threats, in these kind of events is, in my opinion, criminally negligent. We saw several people killed and many more shot in Las Vegas at the Country Music Festival, where the guy shot high-angle shot from the hotel window. We saw 5 cops shot in Dallas a few years ago, and several of those were high-angle shots with a rifle. You've got to anticipate these, boys and girls, if you're running a police agency. You've got to anticipate this in the security of these large events. If the police don't have enough manpower, what about volunteers to simply occupy some of that high ground with binoculars and a radio and call it in? What about a few $100s worth of drone equipment to be looking down onto those rooftops within rifle range of that venue? There's no excuse not to have that nowadays. Now, I wish we could get a bunch of volunteers from just ordinary citizens, ordinary patriots out there. The problem is police agencies aren't going to put you into a position like that without vetting you if they don't know you. They don't have time to do that. But those of us who are retired police officers are known by our local law enforcement agencies. We don't have to be vetted. I'll volunteer to go sit on a roof at an event like this with a radio and a pair of binoculars. And I bet a lot of other retired police officers would as well. Now, ideally, that high ground should be covered with someone who has a counter sniper capability. But retired cops are not cops anymore. So we can't necessarily reach out and touch someone with a bullet, but we can certainly reach out with a radio and warn the person who is at risk from anyone on the roof. Now, I'm not going to say we are at war yet. But I think what we have seen in the last few months are the precursor events which could certainly explode into a cultural civil war, a political civil war. Now, there may come a time when our side has to start resorting to violence, like the violence we see coming from the left. But our return violence, if we get to that point, will be defensive in nature. We will use it to ensure free speech can occur, not to stop it. And that's what the liberals are trying to do. They have lost the last election. They are likely to lose future elections. The number of Democrats being registered is way down. The number of Republicans being registered is way up. The Democratic Party is very possibly in death throes. And when crazy zealots realize they're losing, they just redouble their efforts. And they will turn to violence. They will do anything to hold on to power. And shutting down free speech is one of the key things they think they have to do to stay in power. Pray for Charlie Kirk's family. For the families of the other victims of this senseless rash of left-wing violence. They can blame me, they can blame you, they can claim it's white supremacists all they want. But the vast majority of this violence is coming from pure left-wing hate. Pray for our country. pray for our leaders as they continue their efforts to destroy this woke culture that the left promotes. That destruction is what has them moving ever more to violence. And God, please bless America. We need it. Thank you folks for watching. If you think these videos are worthwhile, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe. We're living through a dangerous time, ladies and gentlemen. Y'all be safe out there.
Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.